Hello, my name is Dr. Amber Hughes. This is the fourth episode of my career counseling series. This series, again, I remind you, is designed not to counsel you regarding your careers, but for those of you who want to do career counseling. This is my second episode looking at the postmodern career counseling theories. In this episode, I am talking about career construction theory. This theory was developed by Mark Savickas. Pretty much all of the information in this episode comes from Dr. Savickas' book, Career Counseling. Mark Savickas developed this theory after he and his colleagues determined that traditional career theories were not, in fact, career counseling theories. Who'd have thunk it? Even Holland's theory, they decided, was not a theory designed for counseling, but rather for career choice or career decision making. They decided that most career counselors were relying on Parsons' model of career choice that was developed way back in 1909, and his was a theory not unlike how we use Holland's theory. His was a theory of career fit. As I have made clear, at least I hope, these theories rely on a stable economy and long-term work in order for these to best work with our clients. However, that long-term stability is not what we are seeing in our current world of work, thus the need for a change. Savickas sought, with his career counseling model, to answer the question, and I quote, "How may individuals navigate a lifetime of job changes without losing their social identity and sense of self?" And he answered this by shifting the goal of career counseling from career decision making or finding one's life work to constructing or creating how to make one's life work. And those are some of the things I'm going to go into in this, at least I hope. I'm attempting to go into these things and I hope explain them a little bit more because I know how kind of out there these concepts can be, these ideas of constructivism and social constructionism. And I mentioned this in a previous episode that these terms are hard to grasp whenever they're new to you. Okay. And so I am just going to attempt to explain things. All right, so when we talk about constructionist theories, we talk a lot about language. The concept of language in career construction theory is a powerful one in that it is not seen as a tool we use, but rather a means through which we create a sense of career. Additionally, language is shaped by our culture and society. Thus, our self is culturally shaped, socially constructed, constituted? I don't even know what word I've typed here. I'm reading off of my script, and I'm like, what? I don't think that's a word. And narrated by language. More traditional career theories may consider context, which I know I've talked about, such as culture as a moderator to career development, as I mentioned in the SCCT episode. Career construction theory, however, considers culture as shaping career development. Okay, so culture is not a side note. It is the note that creates who we are and thus creates what we know. The importance of language in this theory carries through to the practice of career construction theory. In practice, career counselors help individuals find meaning in their lives and careers through the use of language in their stories and narratives. This means that our words matter just as much as our clients' words matter, because often through our words, we are teaching and helping create knowledge about careers and working just with our questions. So let me take a minute here to help you think a little bit more about this, and I may take a minute or two because I think this concept's hard. Like I said, it's hard to grasp. So first of all, I want you to think of a story from your family or your childhood. I'm talking about one of those stories that gets told over and over again. The story that has evolved over time from something that happened to, well, maybe a little bit of an exaggeration of the same story, or maybe not, because nobody really remembers what actually happened. In fact, you just remember the version of the story that gets told, and you remember it as if it were actually what happened. Has anyone had that experience? In my family, we have this running joke about my younger sister. She always chimes in when we tell family stories and says she remembers what happened. Well, half the time she wasn't even born yet or was too young to remember anything. We tease her all the time about this. In reality, though, she likely does think that she remembers the story. She has just heard the story so many times that she feels like she was there. This is the power of language in the story. These stories or narratives help create memories. Think about your own family gatherings, or think about, I don't know, just some big event that's happened, some major event. Do you usually take time to process the event afterwards with your significant other or kids or parents or a close friend? It's this processing that allows us to make sense of things and to create some sort of narrative or story that allows us to better understand what happened. This is the basis for career construction counseling. I have one more example, and this is, and I could use an example from, when I started in the counseling field, but that happened a while ago. And so my use of the counseling language is a really big part of who I am. Okay. What has happened more recently is that I started to learn how to kayak, or I have an inflatable kayak, not one of those hard ones. I've been learning how to boat, and I just totally feel like it, especially when I started, I was stressed. I didn't know what I was doing at all, had no clue. And my significant other was the one teaching me how to boat, which didn't help matters. And we're talking whitewater here. So even though we were in some easier stuff, it was, there was still a level of, I don't know, even just speed. The water's moving faster. There's, riffles and rocks and things. And so it's, even when it's not scary, it is scary, or it was to me at the time when I was just starting. And he's using all these terms and this language, and he assumed that I understood what was happening, because that was the language he spoke, and he'd been speaking for 20 years. This language of see that wave over there, go surf it. I'm going to go through this rapid and do this S move around a rock. Make sure that you square up and hit that wave straight. Those things that, and some of the words are familiar to you, but when you're out there on the water and you're trying to identify those things, like, hey, see that wave over there? Go surf it. There's 100 waves in this freaking river, I remember thinking. And how am I supposed to know which wave you're talking about, so that I can go surf it when I don't know how to surf? I don't know necessarily what surfing even is. And so this level of frustration that was coming simply from the language he was using, I wouldn't have been so frustrated if I had understood what he was saying. Or he had used different words to explain it. Okay, so there was this huge difference in the language that we used. And since I have gained a sense of what all those words mean, I feel like I know what I'm doing, even though I don't necessarily know that I'm any better at boating now than I was then. It's just that I now understand the language, and I now speak the language, and so it has become part of who I am, if that makes any sense. Because prior to him teaching me more about boating, I wasn't totally new to it. I've been on the water for years and years, both as a customer and a raft and a whitewater, and on my own in flatwater. So this wasn't foreign to me. It was the language, however, and the piecing together of the language with what I was doing, making that connection, that was what was really challenging for me. And like I said, it was super frustrating. And so language is powerful. Even it is powerful in helping create what we know, in that now I have names for things that I know I didn't have names for previously. Okay. I have names for things like surfing on a wave in a river. When I didn't have a name for that, I didn't know what that was, right? I didn't know that was a thing, and now it's a thing. Okay. Because now I have a word for it. All right. And that's what this theory is saying, that when we have words for things and we can put meaning to those words, then they become things for us. If we don't have a word for it, or if we don't know what it is, then it's nothing to us, right? Back to the theory, constructivist career theory focuses on the power of language to construct a sense of self. The sense of self encompasses an individual's identity. Okay, so these are the two things we're focusing on doing with this work, specifically identity work. Identity, according to the theory, is a social construction that is more specific than the self. Identity applies to multiple parts of us. Okay, So you're going to have identity in terms of your career. You're going to have identity in terms of your, oh goodness, I can't even think right now. There's all kinds of identity work we do out there. Your sexual orientation, you have to do identity work around that, who you are. Your gender, you have to do identity work around that. Okay. What we're talking about here is our career identity. And according to this theory, we are who we are in relation to our roles and because of who we are to others. So if I ask you to tell me who you are, if I ask you to tell me what your identity is, chances are you're going to tell me who you are in terms of what you are to other people. Okay. So for example, I am a counselor. I can only be a counselor if I'm counseling someone. I'm a professor. I can only be a professor if I am teaching someone. I'm a mother. I can only be a mother because I have a child. I am a sister. I can only be a sister because I have a sibling, right? So all of these roles that make me who I am, these roles that constitute my identity are roles because I am a social person and live in a social environment. And that's what this theory is saying. Okay? So we are who we are because of our roles and our relationships to others. And specifically, when we look at career identity, Civicus talks about how changes in work can lead to a loss of identity. And so some of you may have experienced this. Likely, a lot of you are, especially if you're in a counseling program right now, likely a lot of you are experiencing this now as you are adjusting to this idea of who you are as a counselor versus who you were. So if you're coming in and prior to being a counselor, you were a teacher, likely your identity is still one of a teacher. And until you get a job as a counselor, you may retain that identity. But once you move on to a role of a counselor, and you may be kind of struggling with that as you learn as you learn about our code of ethics, as our responsibilities as counselor, your idea of who you are, even in a teaching role, is going to shift a little bit. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a dramatic thing like a loss of a job, even though that can certainly help create a loss of identity. It can be something as simple as shifting jobs or going to school, especially for something specific like counseling, that can create kind of that change, right? That change in who you think you are and how you think of yourself. Okay, so it's really, when we struggle with these things, we find that they are really larger than our career, right? Because if a job was just a job, it wouldn't matter that much, but it's not. A job is much more than that. And this idea of who am I if I am not a blank, which comes out especially in times of job loss, okay? So it's something that, as I've been mentioning with like coal miners. So who am I if I am not a coal miner? I don't know who I am, and so I have to, I have to grasp that. I have to hold on to that concept of myself as a coal miner, even if I'm not working as a coal miner, because otherwise I don't know who I am and I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and those things are very scary. Fortunately, this theory can help us address some of those things. The purpose behind career construction counseling is to help clients create or develop their career identity, to help them answer the question of who they are in terms of their life work. Now, this works well with clients who are undergoing a life change or who are working just to work, right? Those examples I just gave. I'm sure you can see how this might really help those individuals out because what they're struggling with is more than just career decision making. But what about adolescents who are still at the career decision-making stage? Well, this theory can still work for them. First, according to Civicus, those interest inventories aren't super helpful anyway. He says you can get an interest using his career story interview much better. Now, if you like Holland and want to use it still, then you can fit it into career construction counseling when you are at the place where you're letting your client tell his or her own story, the initial storytelling, if you will. And I've found, so I have done, I have quite a bit of experience using interest inventories like Holland's codes. And And they are helpful, especially with some individuals who are just looking, especially in college settings, who are just looking to make a decision about careers or a major. It can be nice and helpful. So I'm not saying to throw it out the door. However, I am saying that you should keep in mind that the economy is changing and the world of work is changing. And so just using something because it's helpful and it works doesn't necessarily mean that it's what's best. Okay. So that's why I'm going into depth with these postmodern theories, because I feel like on some levels we're doing our clients a disservice if we don't help them understand the bigger picture of what's going on with careers. If we keep doing career counseling like those kids or those students are going to stay in their career for their lifetime, then they're going to be stuck when they can't find a job after they graduate from college, or they're going to be stuck whenever they're working in a job that has nothing to do with what they went to college for. They're going to be stuck whenever they decide to change jobs 2 years after college, right? So all of these things are the reality of what our students, our clients are going through. And so we need to help prepare them for that reality, not just help them in the short term. We need to be helping them in the long term as well. So what are we actually doing in career construction counseling? And that's what I'm going to get into next, the application of it, the counseling model. So narratives are stories we tell about ourselves, right? Like I mentioned, those stories that help us make sense of things. They create what we know and allow us to make sense of things as if we were someone else. Okay, so it puts us out of the picture a little bit. So when we're telling a story, so think about that story you tell over and over again. You become the narrator of the story, and your role in the story, maybe you have two roles. You have a role as a narrator, but you also have a role in the story. But those are separate, okay? And so it separates us from the story, which can be powerful whenever it's something that's difficult. It can be powerful in that it also allows us or our clients to take on a different perspective. Okay, so it allows our clients to see things from a different angle whenever they're telling these stories. And if they haven't, so when I talk about stories, I'm first talking about those stories that you always tell. Okay, the ones that you've already developed. Essentially, that's what we're going to be doing with this counseling. Is we're going to be helping our clients create that story, that end story that they tell over and over again. Likely, they haven't done that with their career though. All right, so you have to help them. You have to help them tell the initial stories or micro narratives, which are small, short stories about their life, their career. And then you're going to help them piece it together in a bigger picture story that helps them make sense of their entire life's work. Okay? So you're helping create a story that makes sense to them, that makes sense in terms of their life, and that helps them move forward. And you use narrative principles to help you organize information into a story that makes sense. So you're thinking about things like plot and characters and climax of the story, okay? And you're going to help use those concepts to help your client put the bigger story together. And you're going to work together. So in this theory, which isn't super different in career counseling, counselors tend to be more active. But in constructivist career counseling, you're going to be active. You're going to have an active role in telling and creating these stories. Now, how do you do that whenever it isn't your story? Well, you're going to use your questions. You're going to use your questions to help your client elaborate on the story. And then after you've heard the micro narratives, then you're going to be able to help your client piece together things a little bit easier because you do know a little bit. Now on to the dimensions of career construction counseling. So there are two dimensions. The first is the relationship dimension. Okay, so I really like that this theory or this model addresses the importance of the counselor-client relationship in career counseling. No other theory in career theory land talks about this, except for the theories I'm going to talk about next. But the traditional theories certainly don't. However, in the larger scope of counseling, the relationship is key. So why do we not talk about it as much in career counseling? We should, okay? So that relationship between counselor and client is important. There are 3 levels to it according to this theory: engagement, where you have to, engage in that relationship with your client; interaction, where you're going back and forth. And again, keeping in mind that the counselor is more active in this theory, but also that the client has to be present. Okay, so the client has to be active as well. Whenever we're using some of those traditional assessments, they don't have to be as much. And so whenever they're coming into career counseling expecting maybe to be told what to do, you may have to do a little bit of work to coach them to be more active in the process. And then finally, encouragement, where you're really encouraging and being positive with your client. The second dimension is communication. So communication begins with the career story interview in this model, okay? And the reason why Savickas suggests you use it is because he says that it helps with anxiety. So especially if this is something that's new to you, this type of counseling, using this more structured type of assessment can help ease that anxiety. The communication part or the communication dimension also involves structure, which we're providing through that career story interview; dialogue, which is the use of language; and then reflection. Okay, and so that's that processing component of counseling. Now on to the career story interview. So like I said, Savickas suggests using this to start off counseling. He recommends following it pretty closely, as he and his colleagues have worked to perfect it. Okay. So he says, why would you change something if we've really put a lot of time and effort into making this right? It's also nice to have that structured format. Like I said, if you're anxious about doing this type of counseling, if you're uncomfortable with more qualitative types of assessments, which is what this is, then having this structure can help, especially as you're starting off. So there are 5 steps to this interview, and he suggests, again, he recommends following them in this order, okay? And this order is intentional because he's starting off with things that are less personal, and then moving to things that are more personal, okay? So it allows you, so he's considering building rapport or building a relationship as you go, okay? So you don't want to kick off any interview with something that's too personal, because you're not going to get an answer, or it's going to turn people off. But after you've walked through some of these different concepts, you're going to get to know your client a little bit better, and so they're going to feel more comfortable telling you personal things a little bit later on. So first we have role models. Tell me about some role models in your life. Keep in mind, okay, as you are using this interview, that it's structured. Okay, so you can simply go through it. Tell me about the role models in your life. But it's going to be helpful if you, throughout the interview, if you don't just leave it at these questions. So use open-ended questions. Use questions like, tell me more about that. You might have to explain some of these things a little bit more. You might want to ask your client to expand on certain things, okay? So feel free to go off script in order to get more information. That you can never get too much information about someone. So feel free to go off script if need be, to help get that fuller picture. Okay, so that's what you're creating. You're creating your micro narratives here. Okay, you're helping your client tell the micro narratives, or those smaller stories, so that you can build big picture stories. So role models what they do is they get at the self-concept of our client. So how he or she sees himself. Okay. And we're assuming that this is going to be represented in role models. Now, if your client tells you that a parent or someone close was a role model, you want to ask them to come up with someone else, because our assumption especially according to Savicus, is that role model or parents are going to play a part anyway. They help guide who we are. What we want is kind of that outside person. So maybe a famous person or someone, a character in a show, or a teacher, a mentor, someone close to them who can give us really a sense of who they are and how they see themselves. The second component or question would be to ask about magazines. Tell me about your favorite magazines. Feel free, because I don't know how many people, especially younger people, read magazines these days. Feel free to ask about TV shows or websites if magazines don't work. Okay. This is going to give you a sense of the preferred work settings for your clients. This is something I've done before I really started doing this postmodern career counseling with traditional theories. So again, we're not seeing that in some ways these two different types of counseling are too far from each other. So when I've used Holland's codes, I've pulled out different types of magazines, and I've had my students, I do this in a class typically, tell me, pick out magazines. I would have them make a collage. So cut out pictures from magazines to make a collage to tell me what interests them or what they're drawn to. Okay, so again, we're not seeing too much of a disconnect here with the different theories. It's just that we're not using a standardized assessment here. We're using a qualitative assessment. The next is going to be a favorite book. Okay, this might be... Okay. So if you, I'm using this microphone to record this, but if you couldn't hear, my daughter came in. There was a little bit of a, hi, mommy. And I'm not at the point in my video recording skills or career where I can edit things out. So we're just going to go with it. Back to, so I'm sorry for the interruption, and we're back to the career story interview. The third step, or the third question, which looks at favorite book. So again, you might need to adjust this question if your client doesn't read. So you might think about what you're looking at is kind of like a longer work, right? So the magazine kind of immerses someone into a world, right? But it's not like a long story necessarily, okay? TV shows are kind of the same thing. Websites, kind of the same thing. Favorite book is going to be kind of a longer story. So you might do like favorite book or favorite movie, maybe television series. I know with, Netflix, some people just really binge watch, so that might be something to ask as well. And what this question does is it connects the self to the setting. Okay, so you have your self-concept with role models, you have your preferred work settings, and then you're listening for that connection between the person and then the setting. Number 4 is mottos. So what mottos does your client tell themselves? And this is going to be advice to future self. Okay. So again, you can see we're getting more personal here. With the first 3 questions, you're asking them these questions that are, you're trying to get at deeper things, but they're doing so in a way that's less personal. And then finally, you're going to ask for early recollections, or early stories or early memories. And these are convictions about life that are coming out with this question. Okay. Again, remembering to use them in this order, and that you may need to coach or to add to these questions to help your client get through them and to get more information out of them. All right, so then the counselor takes the interview and starts to make sense of it. Okay, so we have these micro narratives that are coming from the interview. And the counselor is going to be the one to first begin to compose a larger narrative. The counselor will assess for patterns and problems, keeping in mind the client's goal for the counseling. So you, and this is something that I kind of skipped over, but you would want to ask why your client's there. Okay, so whenever they initially come in, what's your goal? Why are you coming to career counseling? And so the counselor is going to, this is where the counselor is definitely more active. The counselor is coming in and looking for patterns, themes, problems, as he or she begins to kind of start to compose that larger narrative for the client. Then the counselor begins reconstructing the client's story. So the counselor may develop a first draft of the larger narrative, but then is going to work with the client to further develop this life portrait. It kind of depends on your approach, how comfortable you are with using this type of therapy, and what kind of access you have to your client. So if you just have like one session with your client, you may need to do all this in one session. So it may start off as a more collaborative process. If you're not comfortable with it, it may be easier to develop that first draft on your own, maybe in between sessions, to give you a little bit of time to think about it, and then present it to your client and work with your client to flesh it out. And the more comfortable you become with this type of work, with seeing themes and kind of putting things together, making sense of the information, you may be able to do it in conjunction with the client right off the bat. So working with the client to, coaching them along, pointing things out when necessary, and helping them piece it together. So it really depends on you and your approach. And like I said, I think your comfort level. Keeping in mind these principles whenever you're helping your client develop the final life portrait. Give the best possible account of the client's life at the time. Okay, so focusing on the positive. Compose the narrative in a way that opens possibilities. Okay, so keeping in mind that we're working towards the future with this. Focus on animating themes that extend the occupational plot. Okay, so focusing on the career aspect. Be credible, comprehensible, coherent, and continuous. So you want it to make sense and be understandable. Be disciplined and controlled in interpreting client stories. Okay, so your interpretation should always go back to the client. You shouldn't, as best you can, you shouldn't make any assumptions about anything. Okay, you should always go back to your client and really allow your client to do that interpretation for you, or to confirm or disconfirm any interpretations you do. All right, now an example, another case. Okay, so we have Paul. He's a 45-year-old man from southern West Virginia. He graduated from high school and went straight into working in the coal mines. He has continued working in the mines since he was 18. Several times in his career, he was laid off when the mines shut down or slowed production. During these periods, he drew unemployment. Paul never went longer than 6 months without working and was always hired back on at a nearby mine. More recently, though, several mines have shut down in the area, and Paul has been out of work for nearly a year. He realizes that he may have to seek other job opportunities, but has no idea what to do, and so he visits a career counselor. In the counseling session, Paul expresses that he is a coal miner and always has been. He is unsure of what else he can do or would want to do. He does know that he can move out of the area to find work in a mine, but has always lived in West Virginia, so moving is not really an option for him. The counselor decides to take a constructivist approach to counseling Paul, as his identity is so tied to that of coal mining and the region. So the counselor starts with the career story interview, as recommended by Civicus, and begins by having him talk about his role models growing up. So Paul talks about his father and grandfather, both of whom were coal miners. Now, as I mentioned, the counselor wants to encourage Paul to consider other role models, as we know that family plays a large part in guiding career development anyway. And we're really trying to get that picture, remember, of who Paul is. So Paul mentions Luke Skywalker as his role model. The counselor then asks Paul to talk about his favorite magazines. Paul says that he does not read any magazines, but does subscribe to a gaming magazine. Okay, so we have Luke Skywalker, this hero, right, of the Star Wars series. He's also a son. Luke Skywalker is a son in this series. And then we have, so that's tied to Paul's self-concept. And then we have the gaming, which is his preferred work settings, okay? So very different from coal mining. The counselor asks Paul to expand on his interest in gaming and learns that he spends much of his free time on video games. He becomes very animated as he talks about this interest and describes building his own gaming computer just last year. The counselor then asks Paul to tell his favorite story. So Paul tells the story of Star Wars. As he describes it, this is the story of a son redeeming his father, and of good versus evil. Okay? This is where it's really important for you to take yourself out of the picture as much as possible. And this is me talking as a counselor, you want to take yourself out, because especially with someone you're familiar with, so if you've seen Star Wars, you know the story. This is where you want to make sure you're listening to your client and letting them describe why he or she likes it, okay? Because you can make assumptions that are totally off base. The next question the counselor asks is for Paul to tell his personal motto. Paul's motto is, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." And then finally, the counselor asks Paul for his earliest recollection. He describes a trip to a theme park with his grandfather. As he talks, Paul realizes that his father and grandfather have played a large role in his career choices as a coal miner. He does not regret this, but is also able to verbalize that he has no interest in coal mining. So think about what themes you might get from this story. Think about the micro narratives that, and certainly this is just a little bit of information, so you might want your client to expand on some of these things. But what are those micro narratives? What are those small stories you're getting? And how might you build them into a bigger picture of what's gone on in Paul's life? And so this is, so some of my thoughts based on this information are these micro narratives of the importance of family, the value that Paul has placed on his family and these traditions, and what really stands out is his personal motto of, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." So I think it's easy to see how maybe he chose a career and has stayed with a career that is working for him, is working for his family. But is clearly not something that he has any real interest or excitement about. And so when we're telling that story, we're also looking to the future of Paul, right? So we're keeping open possibilities, and he's kind of built these possibilities into his story, right? This possibility of working in something that really animates and excites him, but also considering how we can include his family, I think, in that final story, in that life portrait of his. One thing to keep in mind as you consider using this type of theory. So I didn't give you the final draft, okay? Just kind of give you a case and how it might play out, because you would need to. First of all, it might be something that you think about, how you can put together this final narrative, but it really should be a collaborative process where we're working with the client to help build this larger life portrait and this larger narrative, and also thinking about moving forward with this. I think it's, to me, it's fairly obvious because I wrote this case that the future is going to involve a career in computers or games or something to that regard, but it's less about that sometimes, and more about how are we going to tell this story so that it all fits together, so that Paul is able to shift and survive this very large career change, and how he's going to still kind of uphold those traditions and the family ties as he does so. I think that's probably going to be the larger narrative that needs told, because that's what's going to need to be made sense of most of all. The interest part is fairly evident. What's larger here is the family connection and the idea of tradition and relationships, I think. You'll note that we were able to get an interest fairly quickly with this, in this case example, and in my experience, that's been the case. Sometimes interest inventories can be too confining, and so you might have gotten at the same place with the interest inventory, but only if you are using it collaboratively with the client. Okay, so interest inventories don't have to be collaborative. You can have your client take it, you can interpret it, and then give them information about careers that fit with their interests. So even when you're using those on their own, you want to make sure that you're still using open-ended questions and you're going back to your client for interpretation of the information. Okay. What you're doing here, basically. It's just that you're doing it with a more open-ended assessment and less of a quantitative, well, obviously it's not at all a quantitative assessment, but sometimes you can get to the information quicker this way because you're just asking your client instead of having them take a structured assessment. Some final thoughts. This theory is actually a counseling model, so it requires a certain level of comfort with counseling and a certain level of practice with narrative counseling in order to use this well. You need to know about those narrative concepts of plot and theme and characters, okay? So you do need to do a little bit of prep work. You can use those traditional assessments within this theory, but again, you need to put in the work to learn and practice using this. Starting with more structured narrative techniques like a timeline or life role circles. So this purely narrative technique of storytelling isn't the only one. I started off when I was using this theory with timelines and life role circles, and those are a lot easier to use, and they kind of give you an introduction to narrative techniques and help you as a counselor start to see things in that way, start to be able to identify themes, and help talk your client through looking at themes and considering how they kind of come together into a big picture. And they can, so using these techniques can help ease you into narrative counseling if it's not something that you're comfortable with right off the bat. I would also recommend just learning more about it, right? Practicing it for sure, reading about it, doing a little bit of research like you would, like I mentioned with SCCT. This is something that that has a lot out there on it, and so you can certainly take it to the next level if you like it.